What's up, guys? Hope everyone's doing good. Today, I'm going to make a video about the economy in Europe and the looming economic crisis, and really just the crises that they've been going through over the last decade or so. Before I get started with that, I want to say that there's going to be no frontline updates today, especially in the Lysychansk Sloviansk pocket. I really haven't gotten enough information. I reached out to the governor of Lugansk on Twitter, and I haven't got a reply yet, but trying to get some information about what's going on in the area. So in the meantime, I'm going camping this weekend, so there's going to be no new video updates until probably at least Sunday or probably Monday. So I really want to talk about economy, which is actually my specialty. I have a degree in economics and something I enjoy talking about, but I'm not quite sure what the interest is. So if you want to learn a little bit about what's going on in the current crisis and how it relates to the war, then please stick around. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay active in the comments. I'd like to talk to you. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a unemployment map of the European Union in 2004, and basically you're seeing some of the strongest numbers that existed in Europe. Obviously, Poland and East Germany is where most of the problem is, and this is really because these were severely underdeveloped areas when they were under the Warsaw Pact and combined with the Soviet bloc. So they had initially very high unemployment rates, and it took quite a while. They didn't join the EU until the 90s, so it could take decades to fix structural problems like that. But for the most part, what I want you guys to notice is the southern part of Europe. Traditionally, these areas are very low in productivity, and this is really because of the geographic location. It's very hot in southern Europe, and the land quality is not nearly as high as it is in some of the more temperate areas. So I'm going to fast forward here to 2015. This is post 2008 economic crash, and as you can see, it was really a disaster for southern Europe. A lot of places north of 13% unemployment, and really that doesn't even tell the whole picture. You look when you see Greece down here. Greek unemployment was more like 20 to 25%. It was even that high in some of the more southern areas of Italy and Spain, and that is Great Depression scale economic woes that they're experiencing in those regions. So really what I'm trying to portray here is that there was a extremely deep economic crash in Europe, way worse in southern Europe than it was in the US or really anywhere else in the Western world. And as you advance to 2019, the numbers for Northern Europe, especially France, they get a lot better. But this is kind of the idea I want to put home here, is that Southern Europe really never recovered from the economic crash. Really never did. And that plays in big to European politics today. There is a lot of disagreement, and I could say some volatile statements that have been made between Greek and German politicians. They don't necessarily like each other. Any Greeks or Germans watching the video, if you can comment on some of these things, or tell it how you see it, I'd really appreciate that. But basically, the Germans think that the Greeks are very irresponsible with money, especially the Greek government. They just spend, and a lot of these places in southern Europe, when they'd entered into the EU and they started using the euro, it was a lot easier to borrow money, and they had access to funds that they never had before. So you were seeing high employment and extreme growth in these locations in the early 2000s, but really it was way more than what it should have been. There was not very good financial stewardship going on in these areas, and ultimately it ended up in a crash that was pretty much impossible to recover from. So we're going to advance. This is 2020. This is during the pandemic. You could see all over Europe, unemployment gets worse. Obviously, businesses are closed, everyone's staying home, but problems get pretty severe the more south you get in Europe. And now there's no map, but this is coming back into 2022. And keep in mind that these numbers here are totals for these countries. The total unemployment rate is 12.6% in Spain and almost 12% in Greece. But in some regions of those countries, employment rate is very much still in the high or in the low to mid 20% range, Great Depression level unemployment level. So these countries really can't stand too much more bad economy. They really can't. I mean, this creates a lot of political problems, a lot of socioeconomic problems. The wealth that existed in some of these southern regions, like, if you can imagine, if people are unemployed, you got 20% of the population unemployed for a decade. Any money that they did have or saved up, they've gone through it very quickly, and the governments are spending, enormous amounts of money trying to maintain their foothold in some of these areas. Pensions are almost impossible for these governments to afford to pay out, things like that. So very deep problems in southern parts of Europe already existing before the current crisis. And there's several reasons other than obviously the financial crisis for this crash. There's some structural and demographic issues as well as geographic issues, which I already spoke on. And here I have a geographic or a topographic map that kind of shows what you're looking at in Europe as far as like land quality. Here in Germany and France, not only is it temperate land that's good for growing crops and things like that, but it's all also just laden with rivers, and not any rivers, navigable rivers. So this basically makes it to where anyone within the river basin, or I guess you could say the watershed of these areas, can easily transport grain or crops or whatever they're growing to the heads of navigation of these rivers, where they can cheaply move that product en masse to international markets. So there is a price parity between, say, like truck and rail. It's about 14 times cheaper to move things in bulk by rail. And between truck and water transport, I mean, it's huge. It's more like 40 or 50 times cheaper. It's like 17 cents per container mile to send something across the ocean or down a river, compared to on a truck it's like $2.17. And it's a huge difference. It's much cheaper, and that creates a lot of extra capital, extra money. Basically, the point I'm trying to get to here is like, it makes the farmers rich. And traditionally in most places of the world, and especially in places like Ukraine and Russia, the farmers are the poorest people in the society. And in any society where you can make the farmers rich, you're going to have a very capital rich, very successful society. You see that in America with the Mississippi watershed. In Great Britain, it doesn't have very many long navigable rivers, but it does have some. And for the most part, it's not that big of an island, and people can get to the sea and get to these ports where they can send their stuff out for export. So countries like that tend to be very capital rich to begin with. And countries that have lower quality lands, like southern Italy and Greece and even Turkey and Spain, it's very difficult to develop these lands. There's not a lot of extra capital floating around anyway. So, they really experienced some of the best economy they were ever going to have back in the early 2000s, and it's probably never going back. So another reason for the looming economic crisis, besides what's going on with geography, we'll talk about demographics real quick. So this is your basic demographic pyramid, and I picked Argentina because it's a country that's completely irrelevant to things that are going on in the world today. It's not necessarily a successful country, but it does have potential. And they do have one of the most ideal demographic structures for any country in the world right now. So basically, you have your babies and your kids at the bottom of the pyramid. And the further you get up the pyramid, the older people get. You have men on the right and women on the left. And to break this down here for you a little bit, when you have populations in these levels, if you have heavy populations, these peoples don't really contribute anything to society yet. Their children, they have to be raised by their parents. They don't even get a job until they hit this 15 to 19 range here. So they're not paying taxes. They're a net drag on the system pretty much, but they're not a total net drag, because obviously this is the future of your society here. One day these children will grow up and they'll get jobs, they'll be productive, they'll buy things, they'll pay taxes, blah 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 blah. So in the next portion, the 20 to 45 range, this is typically the heaviest spending here. So you got spending in the bottom because the parents of these groups are spending money on their children's, for food, clothes, school, technology, whatever has it. So that drives the economy as from a consumer standpoint. A lot of sales taxes are collected from that. A lot of jobs are created because things need to be created. And the people in this range are usually the most racked with debt. When you're young, you're buying cars, you're buying houses, you're having kids, you're paying off student debt. So there's a lot of debt here, but this is where you hear a lot in Western societies about consumer-based growth and debt-based economies. Is there's a lot of wealth that's generated and created by servicing these populations, these younger populations. Now, when you get above 40, these people are the most experienced workers, and that really says something because they're the most productive. They're creating the most value-added things. They're the highest paid. For the most part, they've paid off their cars, their houses, they've paid off their student debt, and they're saving up money for retirement. So they're pouring money into stock markets, into assets and things like that. So they're contributing some to the growth, but for the most part, the two big things that they contribute to are taxes, because they're making the most money, so they're paying the most taxes, and financial markets. They're saving the most money, so they're buying the most stocks, they're buying the most bonds, and those are all very important things to society. And then when you get to the top of the pyramid, it starts to become a complete net drag on the economy. These people, they're old, they're retired, so they're no longer paying taxes. They're no longer really buying stocks and bonds. For the most part, they move their assets into low-risk categories. Like they'll buy government debt, they'll put it into IRAs, and they'll put their money in, they'll stash it away in safe places where they'll have it for the rest of their lives, so they can live out comfortable lives. And of course, this is what we all want, and this is the best way to live your life when you get into these older ages. But from an economic standpoint, they're a net drag on the system because they're not producing any goods. So they're not really consuming any goods because they've already bought everything they're going to buy in their lifetime. And they're withdrawing money from the government in the form of Social Security and pensions. So they absorb resources from the rest of society from an economic standpoint of view. But in this particular case here with Argentina, this is the ideal demographic pyramid because you have huge populations of people here in the middle that are paying taxes and producing and spending money, and they are carrying the new generations and the old generations. So there's really, in a situation like this, there should be enough to go around and make it function properly. Now, let's take a look of Russia real quick, which, we can talk a little bit about this another time if you guys are interested in it, but there's a pretty good argument for a war was always going to happen between Russia and Ukraine because of the situation Russia is in. This is almost 90% sure a terminal demographic. The Russian population is basically dying, and Russia in a few years is not going to have the finances to pay for their pensioners, because as you can see, the the younger peoples, they're not that big of populations. The older peoples, all these people are moving into pension range, and the government's going to be paying out more in pensions than they're collecting in taxes. And they're not having enough kids to create replacement generations that'll soon move into these producing, consuming, and tax paying age cohorts. So this is a very, very bad, almost terminal demographic for Russia. And you'll see in the next few years, it's believed, or Peter Zion has said this several times, that the Russian government likely is very aware of the situation and believes that they'll lose control of their own country sometime within the 2050s, either through minorities that are actually having kids gaining majorities over the Russian population. At that point, it's going to be really hard for a minority Russian people to hold a country together that has more non-Russians than actual Russians in it, or just through straight debt collapse because they can't pay off these pensions and they're not bringing in the revenue that they need through production within their economy. But that's just Russia. Now, I mean, let's look at some of the other European demographies to see. I mean, and this is really saying something for the EU. Germany is also in a terminal demographic. They're about to have a huge number of people. They have a large population cohort that's between 50 and 65 that's about to go into retirement. And when they do, there is not enough young Germans to fill the roles that these people are retiring from. So there's not going to be enough tax revenue. There's not going to be enough goods produced in order, and there's not going to be enough finances in order to finance things like new industry, new factories, new production. So this is a terminal demographic for Germany. And you're looking at a lot of the same for most of the EU. So in the case of Europe coming out of the recession that they never really recovered from, really two recessions, you have the 2008 recession and then you have the 2020 pandemic, you got back-to-back horrendous economic situations for Europe. And really the way America recovered and Europe's only real chance of recovery is consumer-based growth. And as you can see, that's not really a chance that Europe has. Like there's not enough young people throughout the whole of the EU to replace the generations that will be soon retiring. So the future of consumption-based growth in Europe is completely gone. So going back to, what can they do about this? And it's like basically, the EU is already dying slowly, but on top of that, you have the Ukraine war. So threats to European energy. And there's a lot of rhetoric going around, especially from the EU Commission, that they want to ban Russian oil and gas. And I have to say that this is incredibly foolish. For one, I talked in one of my earlier videos about they can replace the oil. They can get some of the oil from West Africa and potentially Venezuela. There's production fields in Brazil and Argentina that they can go for, but really that's just about it. So they can replace some of the oil, but they can't replace the gas. It's impossible. And if they get rid of those two things, they're not going to have basically the foundation that they need to run an industrial economy. And you might say, well, we've moved past the industrial age. We're into the technological age. And it's like there's not that big a difference between the technological revolution and the industrial revolution. They're one and the same. So without the industrial revolution, without factories making the raw parts, you have power plants producing energy, and that energy then goes to harvesting raw materials, creating metals, creating basically the foundation of anything else that you're going to create. And then you have energy going to, say, semiconductor fab facilities that then turn into computer chips, computers, and then you have software, which is the top of that ladder. It's all one big pyramid. And to think that the technology and the software can do anything without the base of it, without that industrial might that has to be brought, I mean, it's just a crazy thought. Like, it's completely going to crash the European economy if they go through with some of these things. And I'm going to pull up some screenshots from a Reuters article I was reading earlier to talk a little bit more about this. But the European Commission has proposed changes to its planned embargo on Russian oil to give Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic more time to prepare for the shift in their energy supplies, 3 EU sources said on Friday. The EU executive set out the embargo this week as part of its toughest yet package on sanctions against Russia over the conflict in Ukraine. But Hungary and other member states said that they are worried about impact on their own economies. See, like, I mean, the problem with these sanctions is, like, it seems like at this point it's way more driven by public opinion than it is by actual real knowledge of industry and how economies work. Like, it should be pretty obvious at this point that any further energy bans by the EU are going to hurt the EU more than they're going to hurt Russia. I mean, Russia's proved to be pretty resilient. They're basing this whole strategy off the fact that if they put enough pressure on Russia, they'll collapse quickly, the war will end, then everyone can get everything back to normal. And it's just simply not true. I mean, first of all, Russia is a very authoritarian society, and they have strict controls on information. So all the information you were seeing going into Russia that was causing protests and outrage over the war, I mean, you're not seeing that anymore because they put their foot on it within the first 2 weeks. And now you're seeing high levels of support for the war in Russia, probably because all the information that they're seeing in Russia is pro-Russian information. And other than, back channels on the internet, it's not likely that significant portions of the Russian population are going to change their mind, So from that aspect, they stand no chance at convincing the Russian population to stop the war. From an economic aspect, they're not really taking into consideration that authoritarian countries with strict controls over information can pass blame for these things on to other things, like, say, economic problems. They're not really looking at the Russian government for why they lost their jobs. As people that used to work for, whether it's McDonald's or Lululemon in Moscow, I'm sure some of them are sitting back and being like, wow, I wish this war wasn't happening. But a lot of them are sitting back and saying things like, the West is punishing us, and that's they're seeing the West as the culprit for why they're having their economic problems, and maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. So, it's really turning public opinion in Russia, against Western countries. So more of this is giving more fuel to Russia to blame this on the West, and it's just going to result in more support for the war in Russia. So continuing on, the tweaked proposal, which EU envoys discussed on Friday morning without reaching an agreement, would give 3 countries help to upgrade their oil infrastructure, the sources said. There would also be a 3-month transition before banning EU shipping services from transporting Russian oil instead of the initial 1 month, to address concerns by Greece, Malta, and Cyprus about their shipping companies. See, I mean, this now you have, not only do you have Hungary, the Czech Republic, and Bulgaria and Slovakia that are complaining about this idea. Now you have Greece, Malta, and Cyprus, which were all southern EU countries, that are also raising the alarm. They're not on board. So you have basically 7 out of the 27 EU countries that do not agree with this. And to be honest with you, 3 months, 1 month, 3 months, what does it matter? Neither are enough time to find replacements for this energy that they're going to be losing. I mean, you're talking about 5 million barrels of Russian oil per day that is shipped into the EU. There's not 5 million extra barrels anywhere around the world that hasn't been spoken for. Now, the EU could work to price out other countries, like poorer countries that have deals to buy oil from, say, Saudi Arabia or I don't know, like Indonesia or whatever, they can price them out and pay more money for it. But that doesn't really do good for the European economy either, does it? So now you have, even higher energy costs, even higher fuel prices, even higher costs for manufacturing within some of these countries. All right, so this is the main part that I wanted to emphasize, and this is a whole nother point, and it's a little bit political, but I mean, it's definitely relevant. Under the changes, Hungary and Slovakia would be able to buy Russian oil from pipelines until the end of 2024, and the Czech Republic continued to do so until June 2024. Bulgaria had also asked for exemptions if others obtained them, but was not offered concessions on deadlines, quote, because they don't have a real point, one official said. The other three countries were granted more leeway because, quote, they have an objective problem. So here's a question. How is it that, the EU can determine that some countries have a problem because they can't get their oil from anywhere, but other countries don't? Like, this is basically the entire EU has the same problem. So to leave out one country and not and allow others to skirt through it doesn't make any sense. This is the kind of thing that probably pisses off Bulgarians. Any Bulgarians watching the video, please, comment. Let me know how you feel. If you care, if you don't care. Certainly this is going to make energy prices go up in Bulgaria. It's going to be harder to drive to work. It's going to be harder for your work if it's in a factory to operate, if they're paying higher fuel costs. But the big thing here is the EU doesn't really have the authority to do this. Sovereign economic issues has always been left up to the individual EU countries. So basically the EU as a collective is trying to impose things on the minority of EU countries that's really going to hurt these countries. I mean, Bulgaria is, they don't have a much better. Bulgaria is down here. They're not doing so well with employment rates either. And some of these countries, the other ones we're talking about, are in this area. They're not doing so well with employment rates either. Like, they're already kind of struggling in comparison to like Germany and France. And they're already kind of wishy-washy on the whole idea of the EU anyways. Now, I'm not saying that the majority of people in any of those countries is against the idea of being part of the EU. They're not. But there are higher majorities of people in those countries that do not like the centralized control. They do not like how Germany and France and Italy kind of make all the decisions and everyone else has to deal with it because they're the largest countries, they're the most populous countries, and they make up the majority. And for the most part, Germany, if they were to ban Russian oil, would probably be fine. Yes, the industry is definitely struggling right now. People are definitely struggling with higher costs, but for the most part, Germany is a far wealthier society than Bulgaria or Hungary is, and it's a far wealthier country, and they can afford to go out on the international market and price out some of these poor countries to buy the raw resources and the energy inputs they need to operate. France really doesn't need this stuff because most of their energy, the highest majority of their energy comes from nuclear power, and they have deals with West African countries, and I believe Algeria specifically to get their gas. Spain gets all of their gas from Algeria. So these countries don't really, their energy isn't really as under threat as the countries in the Baltics and in Eastern Europe. So, all right, that's all I got for you guys today. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the EU specifically. I mean, tell me what you think about Olaf Scholz or Ursula von der Leyen. Just throw it in the comments. Keep it coming. Thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Everyone have a good day.